I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth, and across the table, I have fellow marketeer Judd Jarzynka and Miles Neville back on the show, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Excited to chat here.
Yeah, excited to chat. And Judd, you're in on this one because you got some things to chat about in regard to this topic. And admittedly, for a while, I avoided gas guns like the plague just because they weren't fun to me. I shot a lot of them for a while, and I was all into them. And then I got into bolt guns and building bolt guns, and that's just where I went. Well, now I'm back. So within that statement, that generally I don't know a lot about the nuance. You know, my AR experience was they're fun to shoot, they're cool. I buy one, slap them together, they're pretty easy to build. Bang, 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 everything's fine. Well, now with the advent of cartridges like the 6mm arc and the 22 arc, I find myself coming back to the gas gun world. And with all the things we have as an industry, you know, the gas blocks and, you know, the suppressors and the different parts and the advancements of the parts and the different ammo and the different bore diameters, it's a fun time to be an AR guy now. And so, Judd, I know you've dabbled as well and kind of found yourself in a spot where you get all the money, you get all the stuff built, and it's a single shot.
Yeah, I've been there for a little while. Yeah, but yeah, I'm kind of on the opposite side of you, Seth. I haven't jumped into the bolt gun builds yet, but I've done a handful of ARs now, and it's just fun. You know,
it is.
You can buy assembled ones, and they're just as fun to shoot. But it's just kind of neat to have a part and piecing them together.
I agree, Miles.
Yeah, the aftermarket is so huge anymore. I mean, you can do so many different things from 5.5 pound guns up to 20-pound guns and whatever. Seven inch barrel to a 28-inch barrel. I mean, yeah, anything in between. You got a ton of versatility.
Fancied yourself a builder of sorts, and you've tinkered, to say the least, over the last decade and a half or whatever of just playing around with ARs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have.
Yeah,
it's a mind virus that gets into your head, and you're like, I bet I could do that. Oh, okay,
yeah.
And then you start shopping, and next thing you know, there's a couple $1,000.
Yeah, it's easy to spend money.
And you've done some winning in that world.
Yeah. Shot PRS gas gun last year. So.
Yeah, and finished
second
overall for the season. And, working here at Hornady, we get, you want to talk about, we've got a lot of employees, and all of the employees are pretty well participants of this sport.
Mm-hmm.
And, just here within the shop, you can see, some super budget build. I got this whole thing put together for $350, and I just bounce around in the truck and shoot a coyote every now and then with it. And then on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you can see you pressed in a few others with $3,500 setups where you turn the barrel down yourself on the lathe, chambered the sucker, and it shoots groups that are on par with some bolt guns. So you really see this huge gamut of performance and cost, but they're all pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do with this podcast is really kind of lay out some things. First, I'd like to start with the basics of a gas impingement system. What are some of the parts on the gun and how do they interact with each other? Then we'll shift gears to the ammo side of things and what's the ammo's role in making this, this symphony all sound right. And then end with all of those variables on the gun and on the ammo side. Sometimes you end up with a scenario where, like I said earlier, Judd, you end up with a single shot, and it's not supposed to be. So what knobs can we turn as the builder or as the end user of the gun to get things set up with a certain ammo to run, feed, cycle, lock back on an empty mag, all of those things, maybe influence accuracy. So to start, gas impingement systems. Let's lay out the basic parts in your basic gas impingement AR that you're going to need to know about.
Okay. So home base is probably the barrel. And then the barrel has an extension screwed onto the back of it. And that extension acts pretty similarly to like receiver lugs on a bolt action, if you're familiar with that. And then you have a bolt that has 7 lugs, and then they're spaced equally for 8. And then the one that's not a lug is where the extractor sits.
Okay.
And so that goes in and then just makes a very slight rotation, and that locks up those lugs together. to hold all the pressure for the firing event. So in that respect, that portion of it is very similar to how a bolt action or any rotating bolt system is. Straight pull bolt
you just
action,
don't roll the bolt with your hand.
Right. It's a lot less rotation than a 2-lug 90-degree throw. I forget what it is exactly.
But there's 7 lugs, so they don't have to go very far.
7 lugs moving half of it, a 16th of a turn basically, to lock into place. And then so you got your bolt's inside of a carrier behind it. We'll touch more on that later. But then going forward through the barrel, it's just a normal chamber and a rifled bore all the way to a point. And at that point, generally speaking, about 2/3 down the length of the bore, 2/3 to 3/4, there's a hole drilled in it. That's your gas port. And so what happens is when you fire, powder burns behind it, builds up pressure, changes from a solid state powder into a gaseous state behind the bullet, and then it goes, and then pressure vents up through that hole, and then it goes through the gas block or the front sight base. If you got, a
like an A2.
front, right, A2, A1. Most people anymore are just using low profile gas blocks, but and it goes through the gas block, and what the gas block does is basically provide a channel to a gas tube and then hold the gas tube in place above the barrel. And so the gas tube has a hole in the bottom of it. Those all line up. That gas port, the gas block, and that hole in the gas tube all line up, and the pressure, the gas burning, comes up and then makes a turn around and then goes back through the gas tube back into the upper receiver. And then it follows into what's called the carrier key, which is that little tube on top of the bolt carrier. It goes down inside, and there's a connection of drilled holes basically through all those pieces that goes into a chamber behind the bolt. So inside the bolt carrier, behind the bolt body, there's a little piston chamber for gas, and it actually does 2 things: pushes the bolt forward and then pushes the carrier rearward. And that separation, with the bolt moving relative to the carrier, or the carrier moving backwards, basically it pushes the carrier backwards away from the bolt. There's a cam inside there that rotates the bolt. So basically that pressure runs all the way back through, pushes the carrier backward. That motion of moving backward rotates the bolt and frees it from the barrel extension lugs. And then that whole assembly bolt carrier group gets pushed back into a buffer, which is then has a buffer spring behind it. So the carrier pushes back, compresses a spring. Your next round in the magazine pops up, and then that spring pushes everything back home. Bolt hits the breech face or a chambered cartridge, and it basically stops. The carrier keeps moving, and as it moves, it does that camming action again, rotates the bolt lugs back into battery, and then you're ready to go.
You're ready to go.
Yeah, and then I guess during that whole process, the bottom of the carrier resets the hammer, recocks the hammer.
Oh yeah, across the top of the trigger.
Yep. So that's the thing that initiates it. I guess we should. Yeah, but you pull the trigger, it swings the hammer forward, hits firing pin sets off the cartridge, and then just goes through.
All of that happens, and it can happen real fast.
Yeah. Wow.
You'd almost need like a little super simple diagram just played on a loop of that happening.
Yeah, and you can go on YouTube. There's several of those if you just want to. Yeah.
So although that sounds really complex, it is relatively simple, and there are bunch of parts in there that you mentioned that we're going to talk about in greater depth. Before we go too far, though, I want to talk about that gas port in the barrel.
Right.
You said it's usually somewhere 2/3, 3/4 of the length down the barrel. So talk to us about the pistol, the carbine, the rifle +1. What does that mean?
Yeah, more or less those are standard. What you'll find is gas tubes come in standard length, and so for really really short stuff like under 10-inch barrels, you're going to see most of those set at what is called a pistol length.
Okay. So that's just the location of that
location of where the port is. And then going from like 10 to 16, you'll see most things on a carbine, right? Maybe 10 to 14.5, 10 to 16. You'll still see carbine length 16-inch barrels. So the 16-inch barrel will have a carbine length port. And I think that's somewhere around 9 inches in front of the upper receiver.
Okay.
And then there's a mid-length, which is popular between like 14.5 and 18 inches or so. They called it the mid-length. It's in between a carbine and a rifle.
Okay.
And then a rifle length system is like 18 to 24 inches in like a 5.56. But then you'll see other cartridges where you have like the 6-arc. We went rifle +1 or rifle +2.
Yeah,
depending.
+1 inch, +2 inches.
Yeah, and so that's rifle length plus an extra inch, or rifle length +2 inches, and that's just to locate where that gas port gets drilled. And that's really a playback on the pressure and volume of gas that a certain cartridge produces. So if you were to, for whatever reason, do a 20-inch 300 blackout and you put a rifle length gas port in it, well, the blackout has a really fast burning powder. And so that pressure curve is going to go up and come back down. And by the time that gas reaches a rifle length system, you probably can't make the port big enough to feed enough gas back
in
to cycle,
Okay.
to have enough to cycle the action. So
That
you'll
makes
see
sense.
something like a 300 blackout will always have like a pistol or a carbine. You typically always have a pistol or carbine length gas system.
Perfect. So we got our basic parts. We got our basic kind of standards, if you will, of where that port's going to be located. And then talk briefly about port size, because as I understand it, that's not a standard. You know, sometimes you see an 86 or you see a 100 thou diameter port,
Right.
but there's no set standard per se.
Yeah, and this gets a little bit deeper than I am really familiar with. But yeah, they vary. They
Okay.
vary. If you go grab 10 different barrels from 10 different manufacturers, you might have 6 of them that are the same, and then you'll have plus or minus either way from there.
Okay. But the diameter of that port could really dictate how much gas can get up into the tube.
Yep. If you have a super tiny gas port, you're going to have less less volume of gas flow through it during the time event that you have. You're just going to have a lower, just the viscous nature of things. Yeah, it's going to flow less gas. And if it's bigger, it's going to flow more gas.
Yep.
So there's in general, you're looking for a happy spot there, because you can do too little and it won't work. You can do too much.
And it doesn't work.
It won't work, yeah.
Okay, interesting spot. So moving back then, the barrel, you've got gas traveling down the barrel, hits the port, goes through the gas block, up through the gas tube. We talked about the lengths. Now you're back to the bolt and the bolt carrier. And those, from a dimensional standpoint, really have to be a standard because they have to fit in all of the ARs, which is one of the beauties of the AR. But there is some nuance there too, different weights and slight configurations.
You get different. So you a lot of guys for 3-gun will try to play with low mass carriers because having less reciprocating mass in the weapon generally creates less recoil. If you can balance everything out, if you can keep it from bottoming out hard and creating like a shock at the end of the travel, if you can balance that out so you have less reciprocating mass, it's less felt recoil. Generally is how that translates. So there's different carrier weights just in the carrier itself, and then there's additionally some carriers that will accept a carrier weight, so you can add even more carrier or more weight to the carrier.
Interesting.
And then inside on the bolt, there's gas rings, which acts really like a ring in your piston.
Yeah,
on
like
an
a
engine.
piston ring.
Yeah, and it's a wear item basically that fits into the bore of the bolt carrier. And it's just a gas seal, creates a gas seal. And there's different flavors, different sizes, mechanisms. Like some of them are 3 individual like C-clip rings, and then some of them are like a coil. People have different proprietary things that you can play with.
Okay. So even though they are standard and everything's the same and works together, there is some nuance there too.
Yep. And if that fit to the carrier is too loose or too tight, it can cause problems. Yep.
Okay. So
too tight's usually less of a problem. Too loose is you'll get gas blow by, and then
kind of like a piston ring. That's no good
exactly.
either.
Right.
So the last step further back from there, I guess you have a trigger, which can play into it a little bit, but also you've got the buffer and the spring, and then different kind of standards there. I've often heard about the H bar, or excuse me, the heavy buffers and the different springs and the sizes and weights.
Yep. So the 2 big delineations that you'll see
H3 buffer
is carbine and rifle.
Okay.
And basically with that, so carbine encompasses all of like the 4-position, 5-position, 6-position stocks, like what you see
mil spec
traditionally from like an M4. Mm-hmm. So if you push a button and your stock slides back and forth into different locations, you've got a carbine buffer. If you have just a fixed stock like the old A1, A2, the Magpul PRS, stuff like that. Now the newer ones fit on either buffer tube. But if you have a solid cylindrical buffer tube that's about 1 foot long, that's a rifle. And so you need to match your buffer to that buffer tube because the lengths are different. So the compressed spring length is different. So if you put a carbine buffer will fit in a rifle tube, and then your bolt carrier will bottom out on the tube and cause damage, basically. So there's a little bit of that, But once you get into those main categories, then basically what you're seeing is there's a standard, which is usually around 3 ounces, and then you'll go to H1, which means heavy 1, H2, H3, and then there's even more beyond that. Like,
Wow.
So
If
there's
you really need to tune something.
right, and so basically that's just offering resistance to the oncoming gas flow.
Just slow things down.
To either slow or speed things up. You get more weight, it's going to go slower. If you get too heavy, then the gas doesn't have enough juice to push it all the way back and actually cycle the action. And if it's too light, then all that gas, maybe you did something a system up front that's providing a ton of gas back, then it can make the bolt carrier velocity so fast that it will not reliably cycle. It will feed cases back into the action, so you can, that's called overgassing basically.
Awesome.
Hornady subsonic ammunition. Now available in a variety of offerings to include the 30-30 and 45-70. For ammunition that delivers big results without a big bang. Hornady subsonic ammunition.
Well, that's definitely a really concise picture. I know we just talked for the last, whatever it's been, 10 or 15 minutes in kind of great detail about those parts. Judd, do you wish you would have had this information or Miles when you built your first AR?
Yes and no. It was a fun trial and error process. A lot of error, but yeah.
Well, I guess learning.
It definitely would have helped, yeah, if that's the answer you're looking for. But yeah.
Well, I was just curious, like I said, I'm really an entry-level builder in the AR space, and, I wish I would have, this information was probably out there, but I wish I would have had a Miles when I built my first one.
Oh, yeah. I would say if you're out there and you're interested in putting an AR together, with that information, I mean, for the Cliff Notes version, if you take anything from this episode, just know that it is a juggling act. If you tweak something, one part, it's going to potentially affect everything else. If you're focusing on one type of ammunition and then you tune your AR to shoot that and you switch to something else, there's potential that it's going to not function the same too. So just be mindful that it is a juggling act, because that's what I went through. Even I was just trying on my blackout. I was just trying to shoot subsonic loads, either the 208s or the 190 sub X's. And I would tweak one thing, and that would bring up an issue on something else. So I just kept chasing my tail. But yeah, I mean, that just be mindful that
is a juggling act.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and it's easy to see, at least in my eyes, like you have this system where everything's designed to be interchangeable, and this brand and that brand and the Frankenstein guns, and you can throw all these different parts together that should work together. Well, there's manufacturing tolerances, and there's different ammo and different, tolerances within each one of these individual parts that could just, like you mentioned, just the downstream effect of you turn this knob once, well, it also turn those other 3 knobs that I wasn't aware of, and it can be a juggling act. And just to throw another ball up into your juggling act, let's talk a little bit now about the ammo side. So that's kind of how gas impingement, that's the parts, that's how it works. Let's look at the ammo side, because that's another thing that just makes it harder to balance. We can talk about things like bullet weight and dwell time and gas volume, because you said it earlier, Miles, it's really gas volume and pressure. And how can we use those things to make this firearm, cycle correctly? So different ammo has different bullet weights and different powder. So how does that affect this whole gas impingement system?
I think we covered some of this on the internal ballistics podcast.
If you haven't, as a listener, if you haven't listened to that one yet, probably helpful for this portion if you do. And it's just a great episode altogether. That was episode number 28, internal ballistics.
Yeah. So when you set off a round and the primer flashes into the powder and you start burning powder, different powders have different burn rates, and they have different energy contents and different volumes that they will produce as a gas form, if that makes sense, right?
So there's not always a direct correlation of 30 grains of powder produces X amount of gas volume.
Right, right. And especially at varying lengths of bore with varying bullet weights, that starts getting real muddy real quick, right?
Okay.
How those things interact. There's a lot of push and pull, give and take on a lot of those things. So what you'll see is like a super lightweight bullet will require a certain burn rate of powder, a certain family of powders, and generally speaking, will produce lower port pressure than if I take that same cartridge and run to the same peak pressure with a much heavier bullet. So if I took a 40 grain bullet in a 5.56 AR, those sometimes can be the hardest thing to get to cycle an AR-15. Whereas if I take a 75 grain load, well, I might overgas, maybe. It might tend to overgas, but it's for sure going to run like any decently proportioned assembly of parts.
Okay. So, yeah, talk about a balancing act there, because you have
Right.
just in 5.56, 223 bullet weight's very
Yeah.
so wildly.
You can get down 30, 35 grains, 40 grains, all the way up, 80. Well, in an AR, 75, 77, 80. Yeah, there's some of them up there that, yeah. So, what you can run into, and I guess we should talk about adjustable gas blocks as well while we're here. That's one thing that you can do, because basically you're creating that push from the gas, and then you're counteracting it with weight and spring rate, right? And so you can adjust the push from the gas with an adjustable gas block, right? You can never make more gas than what comes out of there. So if you're undergassed, an adjustable gas block isn't going to help you. But if you have enough or too much gas, you can tune it down with an adjustable gas block.
Okay.
And what that just runs a screw, basically. There's a hole, and you run a screw past it, and you just close and close and close. It's basically
Pretty simple design.
it's just a variable, surface area of how much gas can flow through. Just like we talk, like a smaller gas port allows less gas through.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're artificially creating that in between the gas block, or in between the gas port and the gas tube.
Got it. Okay, well, let's change that up, or not change it up, but just expand on that just a little bit further, not as far as the gas block goes, but with ammo, because that's just in 223, 5.56.
Right.
Let's look at something like a 6mm arc, or, there you've got 58 grain bullets you could hand load up to 110 grain bullets, or 300 blackout like Judd's been talking about. You've got bullets up as heavy as, some manufacturers 220 grains.
240s.
And you can go
240 sub.
all the way down to 125, 100 grain bullets. You've got almost 150 grains difference in bullet weight, which 150 grains of difference, 150 is the weight of a bullet.
Yeah. Certain cartridges, you can get a huge, huge range of and then the other thing on top of that, at some point, usually those will transition from being a full, like I call a full power, where basically the goal is to get as much velocity out of it with a lighter weight supersonic load, to now you're trying to regulate the velocity, not so much get as much energy out of it as you possibly can, because you want to hit below that threshold that will create a supersonic crack, right, with 300 blackout subs. So in that 190 to 220 grain range, usually those are going to run much lower peak pressure, as well as requiring much smaller volumes of powder, because you have so much bullet there, right? So that becomes like a real balancing act in and of itself in that subsonic realm. But so you got a huge range, and so you'll see on a lot of higher end factory guns that are meant to be 300 blackout from the get go, purpose built that way. They'll have even blanket adjustable gas settings that are like, okay, well, this is supersonic, this is subsonic. And what that is, the supersonic cuts off a lot of gas flow. The supersonic or the subsonic opens it up, because you're trying to get as much as you can to cycle the action.
So you have to go adjustable gas block if you're wanting to.
If you want to flip in between the two, it can be. There are certain circumstances that will basically make it impossible to find a happy setting that will run super lightweight and super heavy. You may get stuck into that. And then the other thing that I guess we should talk about too is the addition of a suppressor.
Yeah.
The suppressor will hold on to a higher level of gas pressure in the bore for a longer period of time. So if you're running towards the top end of like you're overgassed, and then you throw a suppressor on top of it,
now you're going to be really overgassed.
You can make things non-functional in a hurry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there's so much nuance to all of that, and like you mentioned there just a second ago, Judd, it might be like you have to have an adjustable gas block to get some things to run subsonic or supersonic, and also I would speculate you might need an adjustable gas block if you want to run heavyweight supersonic and lightweight supersonic.
Yep.
I think of the 6 arc where you've got, let's say you wanted to hand load those 58s or those 75s, but you also want to shoot 108 factory ammo. You go an entirely different burn speed of propellant, similar charge weight, but different gas volume by a lot. And we did not mention dwell time.
Right. Yeah. So what dwell time is the time while the bullet is going down bore, basically from when it passes the gas port and gas starts going up into the gas tube, that time from that moment, that's the start of it, to when the bullet exits the muzzle. That's dwell time. And generally speaking, longer dwell times will give you more gas back through the gas port.
Because it's under pressure still.
Right. And so where you can run into trouble here is if you have a ton of dwell time, you can have gas come back and actually try to unlock and extract a cartridge while you still have pressure built up in the bore.
So the brass is swollen to the chamber walls. It's not wanting to extract likely, but your bolt says it's time to come out of there.
Right, yeah. Because the name of the game is to have the bullet exit out of the muzzle before things start to try to unlock, for sure.
Yep.
You don't want bullet in the bore with your action unlocking. And even if the bullet is already out of the bore, but the system is still highly pressurized, it takes time for all that pressure to evacuate the bore. And all this has happened super quick, so your margins are pretty thin here. But yeah, even if the bullet's already gone and you've still got built up pressure while you're trying to extract, that's where a lot of times you'll see people will report, well, I'm getting pressure signs. I'm getting ejector swipes off of my
ripped case heads.
Right. And then if we test that same ammo in a pressure and velocity single shot, bolt action, more or less you can think of it. If we pressure test it there, peak pressure is fine. Because generally,
a timing issue.
Right. In a bolt action, if you see ejector swipes, I can pretty much bank on you're over 70,000 psi. Like you've
you're
exceeded.
Right up there.
Yeah, you're running high pressure loads to get extractor swipes on a bolt action. To get it in a gas gun, I would say generally no. I mean, you can depending on how your gas system is set up and dwell time and all that, you can see ejector swipes on 45,000 psi ammo
because the timing is wrong.
If the gas timing of all of what you're doing is wrong.
Wow.
And generally to correct that, it's you put more weight, more spring, and tune down the gas. There are some setups, just the combination of things, a particular barrel or particular gas port size, a gas length, that you may never get away from it. Just
it's there.
And you just with what you've got, you might not be able to tune it out, and still have the gun run.
Wow.
So like ejector swipes in a gas gun, not great, but not like, oh God, I should stop.
Okay, fair enough. And again, that timing, such a tightrope, and you going through all of this, it really makes me wonder how any of the guns operate at all, because we're measuring things in tiny microsecond chunks, and all that has to be right.
Right, and that's so. Generally speaking, if you want things to work, it's like the military has put 60 years or more now of development into the AR-15 M16 system. And basically tuned it out for reliability. So if you just go mil spec everything with a 5.56 and run 62 to 75 grain, 77 grain ammunition, you're probably not going to run into any problems.
Well, what if you're trying to build a 300 blackout ultralight to run subsonics?
Yeah.
Then you have to start really doing some homework.
Yeah. Then it's just that you're balancing out how much gas you're feeding back versus how much weight and spring you got on the back end.
Okay.
And so if it's short stroking, not getting not locking back, then reduce the weight or the spring rate on the back end, or open up the gas flow if you can. You may have to find a gunsmith or somebody to open up the gas port for you. That's kind of usually the last resort. I would generally say work on the replaceable parts first. That's the easiest thing.
Plug and play.
And if you can't get anything to work, then maybe look into. You might have a special child that needs some.
I feel like you're talking right to me.
I am. Yeah, I was.
That was my experience when I put together my 300 blackout, and I wanted it to shoot subsonics.
Was that your first AR build?
That was my first AR build, and my longest AR build. Took a while to get that thing.
All right.
The hit target impact indicator easily attaches to most target stands. The highly sensitive internal accelerometer detects vibration when the target is impacted. Light it up with the hit target impact indicator from Hornady.
Well, let's shift gears into, you've got all of these parts. We know how they work. We know what they are. We talked about the ammo. Now, okay, how do we tune something up? And Judd, I'm going to bounce that right back to you. So you walk us through what happened and kind of what knobs you went to turn first to diagnose what was going on.
Yeah, I'll kind of have to recall the order of events here because it's been a chunk of years now, and I will say I'll talk through the way I did it. It may not be the right way. It may not be the wrong way.
It was a way.
It was a way. So, and again, that was my first AR build. So it was just a trial and error deal. At the time, I was probably pretty frustrated. Looking back, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time I was frustrated. So yeah, I went adjustable gas block on that just because I assumed there could be some finicky things. And what I think I just bought a complete lower and then pieced on the rest, everything else. I just could not get enough gas, so I thought. So I was cutting buffer springs right or wrong. What did I even do? What I actually ended up doing is I changed the trigger out, even thinking there was a lot of force on my bolt, and then I drilled out the gas port too. I think I just went on the manufacturer of the gas block, figured out what the diameter was of the port on the gas block,
found a drill and
a bit and drilled out. And again, it was a cheap. I'll use cheap loosely. I think it was like $100 barrel at the time.
Short sucker too.
Yeah, short barrel. So I kind of took the risk. If I mess it up, it's a short barrel. It doesn't have to be super accurate.
You've lost more than that as casino, so we'll gamble with the barrel.
Yeah, maybe we won't get into that, but yeah. So anyway, I drilled the thing out, and I think what it actually came down to, I kind of skipped ahead of myself. The last thing I switched, even I cut the buffer, the spring down to a point where it was like, I don't think I'm going to go any farther. I've cut a lot of this off. Drilled out that gas port, had the gas wide open, getting everything that I can. And I don't know why or how, again, 7-month process. I'd work on the thing, put it down. Okay, get some encouragement, come back a week or two or however long later, mess with something else.
Order parts from Midway.
And then I don't know how it came to me. And again, this is just the way it worked out. And it may not be like this all the time. You guys may not even agree with me, but I made this change and it fixed it. I just thought about, the trigger putting force when it's pushing the bolt back. The trigger I felt like was putting a bunch of force on the bolt. So I think I had a LaRue in my desk. I put that on there, functioned great. I haven't touched it since. So yeah, once I switched the trigger, again, I drilled the gas port out.
Yeah, I did all those things.
I did the buffer thing, and then when I switched to a different trigger, just it may not have been a better trigger, just the way it contacted my bolt carrier. Now it functioned. So and I haven't touched it. The gas is wide open. Different trigger.
Works.
Yep, and it works fine. And the thing too is, with that little barrel at 100 yards. I can put out a little 2-inch piece of steel. We just have it for fun, and that thing will smack that little piece of steel with that little barrel. So yeah, it's
awesome.
A lot of fun.
So for the guys out there listening, and for me who's got some builds coming up, obviously the 22 arc, maybe another blackout pistol in my future as well. So when we say we've got problems, we need to tune them. We're talking either one, it's overgassed and you're getting feeding issues, and we'll talk about how to notice that, like maybe your ejection pattern, or it's not getting enough gas and it's not locking back on an empty magazine and it's not feeding. And then like to also talk about how it looks like it might be undergassed,
right,
but it's actually overgassed, so you're skipping over the lockup and you're not feeding well, because then that's gray area. But let's first talk about that ejection, because a lot of people talk about, I'm ejecting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock. And what does that mean? And is there a sweet spot, or is that more dogma? What is that?
Generally speaking, that's true. From what I've seen. So we did some high-speed footage, because I had a 6 arc that I had built that was the opposite, that was overgassed. So they were doing some high-speed shoots for marketing, for getting gel shots and stuff. And I was like, well, you guys got it set up. Let's get some high-speed footage of this thing, and so just see what's going on there.
Right.
And in the process of tuning out that problem, a couple of high-speed video shoots that I got in on, what I seen was that basically the carrier pulls the bolt back, and there's a little plunger ejector on there, right? And so it's got a spring plunger, and more or less the sideways velocity of the cartridge case, once it starts to eject, once it clears the port and throws it out, the X vector, right, is more or less the same, regardless of how fast the bolt's moving backwards.
It kicks out.
It's going sideways at the same velocity.
Okay.
But what changes with the gas flow is the bolt carrier velocity. And so the faster that goes backwards with the same amount going sideways, the more rearward you're going to go.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit counterintuitive because generally people say, well, 3 to 4 o'clock is the place to be. So you would think then the faster the bolt carrier moves back, well, the more rearward it's going to move. What gets in the way of that is your ejection port and your brass deflector on the side of the upper.
Okay.
And so if you are moving backwards so fast that the case can't clear the ejection port before it hits it, then that's what starts throwing you back up forward.
Oh, like the 1 o'clock
1
position.
o'clock, yeah.
Oh.
And so generally that's the reason why. And what you'll see is you'll see dings on the cases. I mean, the ARs are going to ding the cases no matter what. But
Yep.
you'll see like pretty violent dings on the shoulder, on the body of the case. You'll see scratch marks on your upper inside the ejection port where the cases just repeatedly smack the rear section of the ejection port. And so the case hasn't been able to clear the ejection port before it smacks into something, and then that bounces it back forward.
Wow.
Whereas in a well-running system, I guess we'll say, the case maybe comes back and just kisses the brass deflector, but it still is going to go 3 to 4 o'clock.
Got it.
One thing I'll throw in there before we move on, Miles did mention the high speed. A trick that I've done, if you have an iPhone, they record slow-mo up to 240 frames a second, I think, which is still, I mean, things are moving fast. So you only catch a little glimpse. But after doing it a couple times, I'll set my phone up, prop it up, hit record in slow-mo, and then, have it focused on the bolt and take a shot. And I'm able to play it back, to see if I'm short-stroking or if I'm overgassed or whatnot. I've used that all the time when I'm messing with ARs.
wow.
I've used my iPhone on slow-mo to
That's really
just keep
interesting.
an eye on that.
And that might be really helpful for this next point, which is, it's okay. Generally, a short stroke be the bolt doesn't come back far enough to strip a new round out. Generally, because you're slightly undergassed. Well, sometimes you can be so overgassed that the return velocity is so fast you're not going to lock up and you're not going to strip another round. That can look like undergassed, but with that little trick, you might be able to see that.
That's how I found that. So I built a 6-arc here recently, and
yeah, buddy,
I've never dealt with anything being overgassed like that. So.
Well, you built this thing to the nines too. Unrelated to the topic. This thing that's a sexy AR.
Yep, yeah, it's pretty nice. I still have yet to get it out and actually use it in the field, but I got it. But yeah, so I went lightweight bolt carrier group on that. So it's kind of skeletonized. It has some steel cut out and whatnot. So I did again go with the adjustable gas block. So I have some control on that if I am overgassed because of that lightweight bolt carrier. I also went with a bleeder gas block, so I can actually let even more gas out if I'm overgassed. So not only can I restrict it, I can just let gas out the front end. And yeah, I had the thing, I can't remember where, there's a recommendation on that gas block of, start here and then use your angles of where your brass is ejecting to adjust. And my brass was going far forward, but I wasn't locking the bolt back. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? It's giving me overgas signs, but I'm not locking the bolt back. So I'm like, well, I'm short stroking.
It's like reading a woman. You've got mixed signals here.
I was stumped, and I've never dealt with that before. So I think I chatted with you, Miles, and then again, used my iPhone trick. And sure enough, it's sending the bolt all the way back, but so fast with so much gas that it was coming back before it could, lock up before it could.
Yeah.
But
that's a lot going on, and then a lot to understand and a lot to read. So, all right, let's say you've got, you're running subsonics, let's say, or you're running something that maybe has higher gas volume, like our Superformance ammo or something like that, or you're just tuning up an AR and you really want it to be perfect. So of all these knobs that we talked about, adjustable gas blocks, buffer weight, the spring, adding a suppressor to things, bolt mass, what kind of knobs are you turning? And when you isolate, okay, here's the problem. How do I fix it? Do you have a knob that you generally go to first to turn?
Yeah, I would say priority-wise, adjustable gas blocks are the easy button.
Okay.
It's a one and done purchase, and it gives you a pretty wide range of adjustment to cover most circumstances. In the event that that doesn't cover it, you're not getting enough gas, or you're getting too much. It's still at the extreme ends of that. Then you got to go to buffer weights.
You'd go buffer weight next?
That's usually my number 2.
Okay.
And then you got different weights. So if it's over gas, put a heavier buffer in it. If it's under gas, try putting a lighter buffer in it. And you can even go so far as, like, people sell kits that you can knock the roll pin out of the back of the buffer and replace. There's a stack of different weights, different material weights inside of there.
Okay.
And so there's people that sell, different denser or less dense materials that you can put in there. So you can put in
Interesting.
tungsten, weights into your buffer and get it even heavier, or you can replace them with, aluminum or steel and lighten them up a little bit if you want to get into that nuanced stuff. If that's still not getting you there, I would try a different spring, personally, just to see if you can get away with it. And then, like, last resort, and then your bolt carrier too is one that you can add or remove weight from as well. I try to adjust it with parts, like
before
adjustable gas or
material.
remove or. And if that's still not doing it for you, check the seal or the alignment of your gas block. That's a big one. If you put on your gas block with a set screw and it's rotated so that the port in the gas block isn't lined up with the port in your barrel, you can artificially cut off a ton of gas that
Sure.
way. So that's an like a no-brainer. Like, check that, because
before you change something, make sure
it's either
you're built
rotated or too far forward or backward. It's easy enough to do that, even if you know what you're doing or think you know what you're doing. We've all
I've been there.
Yeah, we've all been there. But and then last resort, it's almost better to contact the manufacturer of the barrel at that point and say, "Hey guys,
What am I missing here?"
I've gone through all these things. See if they'll help you." And as like a last resort, if you got the ability, maybe send that off or do it yourself. Yeah, in small increments, open up that gas port.
Yeah, that's absolute last resort.
Yeah, that's like almost
break
never,
in case of emergency.
Yeah, almost never get there, but sometimes that's what it needs.
Yeah, well, and talking about all this, I keep coming back to it. Like, it's amazing that these things even work ever, but that they work so darn well. And as you get into different cartridges, we mentioned the 6-arc and the 300 blackout, and there are many, many others.
Yeah.
You may find a situation where there is no happy spot. It either works really well with this or it doesn't work with that. And sometimes that can be hard to accept because you want it to work.
Physics doesn't care about your feelings sometimes.
Generally, no.
Yeah. So
physicists also don't care about your feelings. I don't know many physicists, but
some of them maybe a little empathetic. But there can be situations too, and I think we kind of hit on it, but I'll go into a little more depth, where you tune your setup for a particular weight of bullet. I set up my AR because I'm just going to run 55 grain FMJ blast ammo. I adjust the gas block so it locks back on an empty mag, give it a couple extra clicks, and it runs reliably. Maybe I did that in the heat of summer. There can be things like shooting that same ammunition at -5 degrees in Nebraska this winter, where the temperature change has changed the burn of the powder enough that I'm not getting enough gas anymore to reliably cycle the action, or vice versa. I set it up when it's cold in the winter, and now in the summer it's like beating the heck out of the system, way over gassed. The addition of a suppressor is the same thing. You set it up without a suppressor, you put a suppressor on it,
you might have problems.
Flow through or not, you're probably going to have more gas coming through it, right? The flow through suppressors.
Yeah, let's talk about those for a minute, because I'm relatively unfamiliar.
The flow through suppressors, generally speaking, are quiet enough, but they're not going to be as quiet as the quietest non-flow through suppressor.
Which may not be, in your hierarchy of components of why you need them to do what they do.
If I want my AR to run and I just want it to run and tame down the noise, flow-through suppressors are awesome.
Yeah.
A lot of duty guns for departments and military application, that's the go-to. That's the way to go.
Yeah. Is there like a baffle design that's different than a standard built suppressor?
Yeah, basically it's got a flow-through design where the gas flows through the suppressor and usually comes out of the muzzle of the suppressor.
Okay.
Whereas a basic usually a traditional suppressor has just a series of baffles that kind of trap the gas and slow it down from coming out. I mean,
Oh, so that could create more pressure.
it holds
back
on
into
to
the
a higher
system.
pressure longer in the bore, and
Yeah.
it generally gets more gas back through the system. To
Oh,
the
that's why
action.
when you shoot a 6-arc or a 6.5 Grindle with a regular can on that you haven't tuned up and you
and-
get peppered in the
yeah,
face.
and you start bleeding.
Yeah.
Or not bleeding. I'm
Burning?
sorry. No, you
I hope
start
you're
your
not
eyes
bleeding.
start burning, and you start crying. You're like, yeah,
You feel it on your face.
yeah, emotional bleed.
Right.
Hornady V-Match ammunition, loaded exclusively with Hornady ELD VT bullets. Elevate your varmint shooting experience, shatter records, and make your mark like never before with V-Match ammunition from Hornady.
So the flow through, it lets that air, it's probably restricting it, slowing it down, but it's letting it get out of the system without pushing or holding
So
on to as much
yeah,
pressure.
Exactly. It doesn't hold on to as much. It lets it get kind of out of the front of the gun better than a traditional suppressor will.
Okay.
So those generally have less of an effect, but a lot of times they still will have an effect.
Sure.
But you'll see in the effects, like if you shoot them back to back, like a very efficient, like trap the gas traditional suppressor versus a flow through, you'll see it on the ejected brass. The flow through will have cleaner brass. The inside of the action for, fire 100 rounds out of both. One will be cake full of carbon. One will be not so cake full of carbon. It'll be closer to one that you shot without a suppressor.
Okay. But generally, in that same situation, the one that does flow through might be just a little bit louder.
Right. Yeah.
Potentially.
For the most part, yeah. And there are the newer ones that are out there. Like there's some pretty good ones, but you're almost always going to get a quieter system with a traditional.
Just kind of a
It's
trade-off.
a trade-off. Yeah,
Yep.
definitely a trade-off. For gas gun, I definitely recommend looking into the flow-through suppressors because, for the sake of your eyes and the ammonia, like feeling that you get out of that and like want to cry and getting peppered with gas and whatnot, like the flow-through suppressors are for sure better for that.
Yeah.
And it can tame them down the noise level. It can tame that down to an acceptable level.
Yeah.
I guess we'll say that it's like
Very interesting.
It's net benefit for you, and then you don't have as much of the stark contrast of on and off. You can find you have a much better chance of finding a gas setting that will work with the suppressor on, with the suppressor off, with a flow through.
Okay.
With the traditional suppressors, you run that ragged edge where it barely works without the suppressor, and then you put the suppressor on, and it's almost overgassed. So
Interesting.
yeah, you can fight that. So generally, I don't have any flow through suppressors. I set my stuff up to run with a can, and it has to run with a can, and that's where I'm at. So
Awesome.
if I take the can off, I know I'm gonna have to either open it up or run it like a bolt action.
Which is not the desired goal.
Yep.
It's crazy, we start talking about powder burn rate, how much that can affect it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Judd, I know you had just this same experience Miles just talked about where you got her up and running, she's running good, and now it's cold outside.
Yeah. So, going back to that 6-arc that I put together, to get that to function down at the lab, I don't know, what do we run? The
70 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at 70 degrees, I had to bleed out some gas since I was overgassed and almost have the thing wide open where it's letting as much gas out as it can. And that was down in the lab. Functioned great, shot great. I got a scope on that thing, took it outside, and that was probably December when I did that. Took it outside to zero that scope, and it was 15, 20 degrees. It didn't want to function anymore. It didn't want to pick up the next round, so I had to cut that bleeder off so it would shoot more gas back through the system and got it functioning. So there may be just a couple corks with that gun.
Yeah.
I've yet to bring it back inside and at 70 degrees and shoot it to see how it functions, but I may just have to be a little mindful of where I need to have that gas system.
Yeah. Well, and these new gas blocks, they make it pretty easy to adjust. And yours with the bleeder system, it's not like you have to strip the whole gun apart to get to it. It's relatively simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The other thing to think about too with this is lubrication.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge. I mean, that should go
It's
without
firearm maintenance, period.
Should
but
go
yes.
without saying. But if you put lubricant on it and it dries away or burns away, and then you cake that action full of carbon, well, that's going to impede motion, and it may start short stroking on you as well.
Well, I'll have to give a shout out to Preston on that one because I was way over lubricated on mine, and then he kind of walked me through, some actual points of where to put the lubrication in, and from my thought process, I'm lubing that thing up.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely not the case.
He'd have been good in the Marine Corps. Open the bolt up and hose it down with CLP.
Get your Windex bottle full of CLP. And
Yeah.
Oh, that is a good point. Firearm maintenance as a whole, especially in a gas operated system, you throw a suppressor on there, you're just trapping a lot of that sooty carbon in there, and things can get gummed up pretty quickly. And if that doesn't have a place to go, or there's a finite amount of how gummy and how full of carbon you can run a gas operated system before you run into problems that can potentially, cause damage to the firearm.
Yeah, I would say I kind of old habits die hard. I kind of just add oil.
Yeah. Well,
but I understanding that there's a limit to where you can't just do this no more. You got to break apart and get the sludge out of there.
Yeah, and that's about when you miss a coyote or two when it's 0 degrees and you're out with the thermal. Gosh dang it! I should have cleaned this thing before we came out.
Nothing's worth missing a coyote. That is for sure.
Yep.
But this has been interesting to kind of really dive into each component, the powder and the different parts on the gun and what knobs to turn. And again, like Judd brought it up kind of midway through this podcast here, is it really is a balancing act, and understand that you're juggling things, and sometimes you can juggle all the things. Sometimes you can juggle most of the things, but not others. And I think back to my time working with Jaden when we were doing the load development on the 224 Valkyrie options, that we're going to have a 60 grain Varmint Express, 75 grain Bowtail Hollow Point in the black line, and an 88 grain ELD match. And Miles, you were part of this, doing all the work, and okay, yep, we finally got this one. This works great. Well, when we take it from the pressure and velocity barrel and the accuracy barrels into actual firearms, we were running into problems with, it would run this great, but it wouldn't run this. And if we set it up to run this, it wouldn't run that. It was really a sticky widget. And finally, we just kind of came to the toss your hands up. Like, we can't dedicate a gas system that will run all of them. So kind of nuance there. I would like one last point to get your thoughts on it. I have no dog in this fight. I don't know anything about it, but is there a accuracy component to this orchestration of this symphony of getting gas to run the gun? Is there an accuracy component in your speculation or in your testing?
Yeah. So when I set up my gas gun, it was a 6mm arc with a 24-inch barrel, and I had
For the PRS
for
division,
PRS. Yep. And 24-inch barrel with a rifle +1 gas system, adjustable gas block. I did a couple of tests with different powders and different gas block settings, basically from just enough to run the gun, and then I just opened it incrementally all the way until it was all the way open, and I think it was like 4 different segments. And what I saw was that the bulk of my shots stayed the same, but as I increased the gas flow, the number and the severity of like the random errant flyers,
the outer edges of the bell curve,
got worse and worse and worse with more gas.
Really?
Yep. I'm not going to say that's going to happen every time, because I'm sure as soon as I say that, we'll get 20 people in the comments that tell me I'm wrong.
I'd love 20 people in the comments. Let us know.
But or that they had an opposite experience, and that very well may be the case. I'm not saying that's going to happen every time, but it was pretty eye-opening for me, because I was like, oh, gun runs, whatever, send it. But yeah, it was a very distinct trend that more gas beyond just enough to cycle it was causing more of those wild flyers. So
interesting.
A pattern that would normally, be in the 1.8 to 2.1 inch range, for 20 shots, I was getting 3.6 inch extreme spreads.
But the bulk of your shot still landing where you'd want them. It's just the severity of those outliers.
Right.
Interesting. You speculate that is just more gas, kicking off the heel of the bullet, or?
I don't know.
Good question.
Yeah. I don't know for sure if it's just parts moving while the bullet's still in that dwell time. Maybe that's some of it. Getting more gas maybe opens things up a little quicker, and in some, on the tail end of that bell curve, some of those were getting there fast enough to start really jacking with stuff while things are still, corked
Interesting.
and under pressure. I don't have a good speculation on that. I'd have to really revisit that one and dig in a little deeper with some better tools.
As anecdotal as it may be, I still think that's valid, especially, coming from you, knowing that you don't shoot anything less than a 20 shot, and that, you're very much, you're very adamant that you don't know everything, but you know what you've tested, and in that testing, that's interesting. I can't say I'm much of a precision AR guy, But if I start building something where I'm really looking for accuracy, I will keep that in mind.
Yeah, yeah. And if your requirement is 2 minute of angle, 3 minute of angle, like, can I hit that coyote at 200 yards, and that's it? That's good enough, or just out recreationally playing around, or a lot of like the 3-gun. A lot of the 3-gun accuracy requirements are not on the same level. Like what I had was
their speed and function first.
Yeah, exactly. What I had was still minute and a half, right? And for an AR, that's pretty solid.
Yeah.
But it was, definitely a delineation from a solidly sub-minute system, sub-1 minute system to, add gas in it, creeped out of that.
Bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, this has been eye-opening for me, again, admittedly, as a novice to the intricacies of the gas gun world. I found this pretty educational. Do you guys have anything that you want to add to maybe more of the complexities of it or to leave our listeners with?
I think, just the biggest thing is to be aware that
you might have to turn some knobs.
Yeah, there's some things that can change it. If you sight in and set your gun up with 45, 55 grain ammo and you jump up to 77s, 75s, you might encounter some issues. If you put a suppressor on it, you're likely going to see a difference in how the gun runs and cycles. Just keep that in mind and try not to get frustrated and work through it.
Right on.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that if you were going to start your first AR build, is there a cartridge that would maybe be a touch easier? Like, would you start 5.56, 223?
5.56 is probably the easiest thing. That's what most of the development of the AR-15's history is based around. So that's an easy go-to as far as all the different companies making different parts. You've got the best chance of everything coming together, fitting and working well right off the bat.
Get a couple builds under your belt, and then one of the things that I've recommended to people is if you want a gun to run subs, I'm going to call out subs specifically because that's generally the way the conversation goes, then just do a little bit of research right out of the gate. Set that thing up to run subs. And you're probably not going to have the best luck with supers. You might, I don't know. But if that's kind of your first priority, make some component selections that are going to set that up to be successful, because you don't want to try to, split the difference, and I want to run 125 supers and 208 subs and end up in an area where it doesn't run either of them very well.
Right.
So that'd be the one thing that I get requested out of me. I get that conversation quite a bit is, we're having trouble with subs. What do I do? And
right. Yep. There may not be a single setting on the gas block or assembly of parts that runs both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
You can, like I said, physics doesn't care.
No.
Sounds just like the PRC podcast we just did.
Yeah.
You got to have them all.
You know
got to
what?
have
You're right.
one sub gun and you got to have one supersonic.
That's the beauty of the
I love
system
it.
too. It's so easy to build another upper.
Yeah.
And it's just calling. Midway USA, Brownells, they're calling out to you.
Yeah.
Start that
Yeah.
basket. Your parts, you get your cart filled up.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, especially now. I mean, we've got the 22 ARC brand new for 2024. We just returned home from SHOT Show here just a few days ago, and man, the 22 ARC support was just overwhelming. I mean, there was whole rifle manufacturers, barrel manufacturers, and everybody in between, from the big brands to the smaller companies, where there was just a lot of support for the 22 ARC. That Grendel bolt face, the ARC bolt face, just a little bit easier to find now.
Yeah.
Really high quality parts there, and the barrels readily available. So now's the time if you're gonna, if you want to build one. Now's the time. It's going to be a fun hot little cartridge in a gas gun.
Yep. No, and I was kind of slow to adopt that one personally.
Really?
But put one together this winter, and it's impressed me. The flat shooting stuff, especially those 62s.
Yeah.
That's a pretty point and shoot solution.
Yeah,
So,
for night hunting for
Yeah.
those coyotes.
knock down some raccoons further away than I thought I had a chance.
I like it. Well, we need to do all things we can to control that population along with the coyotes as a conservationist and as a hunter. So thanks for doing your part. Anything else, guys? All
I
right.
don't think so.
Well, appreciate all your time, your effort, your deep understanding of how this all works. Thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast and found it educational on not just the systems and how they work, but how they work together and some of the knobs that you can turn to help take that AR-15 into a really good functioning platform. ARs are fun. They're fun to build. They're fun to shoot. And for the last 70 years, it's just been a good time. So hopefully this inspired you to build another one. We'll catch you on the next one, guys.